steels live and in person. Watch as they chop, grind, and weld their creations into existence right before your very eyes. Feel free to ask questions at any time directly to your host, Pat Jansen. The doors to the shop are open, so pull up a stool, kick back, and welcome to the Grease and Gears Garage.
Hey everybody, welcome to Grease and Gears Garage, brought to you by Progressive Insurance. I do not look like Pat Jansen, I mean as much as I'd like to, because he's a looker, let me tell you. We're here with Austin Andrella and Brian Butera. We're at the Cherokee Rally, which is pretty awesome. The weather's fantastic. We got some cool bikes here, some nice stuff going on outside. Got Dave Pierwood's bike show or paint show coming up here. Cycle Source bike show coming up tomorrow. So it's some great riding, some great people, good stuff to see, and we're gonna try and bring you some good stuff here. I think Austin's got some welding things he's gonna do. He has his lovely assistant Brian with him. He was trying to be Christina Aguilera earlier, but he can't dance. So he looked good though, looked great. So what are you gonna do for us here, Austin? What's your plan?
We're just gonna go over some stainless processes on cleanliness and tips that we do. Because if you don't do the same thing every time, you can't rule out any variables if you're having problems.
Yeah. So you're going to do multiple, you're going to do aluminum and steel, going to just jump around?
If we get to aluminum, I brought some, yeah.
Well, let's get a game plan and see what we got going on.
All right. So normally if you do stainless steel exhaust, you're going to want to purge it, inner purge it, because it'll sugar on the inside because oxygen will be introduced into the molten metal. So
that's what this setup is.
Yeah, the purging process is you either have a splitter on your regulator with an individual splitter that you can, or with an individual regulator that you can monitor how much is flowing into the tubing, which is between 7 and 15. You don't want too much because it'll blow the weld out. It'll create pressure. You have to have a relief to allow it to escape because the argon's heavier than oxygen, so it's like.
What's the purpose of purging? Why do you purge it?
What I was saying was the stainless is a metal that won't corrode very easy, so it has properties in it that if you introduce too much heat, it'll rust, or if you don't purge the molten, like when it's orange,
right,
it'll actually bring air, oxygen into the weld,
right,
and it's called sugaring. It looks black.
Right. So obviously it's something you definitely don't want.
It'll crack. It's just not structurally sound weld.
Well,
it's more of like a process pipe for potato chip factories or.
Yeah, the proper way to weld an exhaust is the same as food grade and all the stuff in machinery. And the purge welding, in simple terms, is when that heat's on the outside of your weld. The inside, which, and I'm sure Austin will get into, when your ends are beveled, especially with a thick wall tubing, that can be ultimately a pretty thin area that you're filling with weld. So the heat on the inside is pretty intense on that metal. And introducing that argon and pushing out the oxygen on the inside will prevent that what's commonly called a sugaring, because it looks like black sugar, which structurally it's not a good weld, and again, coming back to the food and pharmaceutical grade industry that I kind of came from, experience-wise, it's not sanitary either, where stainless work usually always is and should be. So,
and then also purging with a certain amount of pressure, it allows the weld to not fall in as much. It kind of helps hold it out, so you get a smoother weld on the inside and outside.
Does that pressure change, or do you always keep the same?
Well, you want to keep it about the same. You let it go for a couple minutes, and you'll purge it from one end, usually a higher end, and like I said, it's heavier, so it'll make its way in and then kind of fill up like an aquarium.
Right.
So then you poke holes on the high side of the other end, and it will push up and out.
So you want it to flow out.
You want it to flow out. You don't want it to build 7 to 10 pounds. That's just how much is flowing into the cavity.
Through it. Well, cool. What are we going to do? What are we going to do first?
I brought some 16 gauge stainless exhaust. We were just going to show some tacking techniques, different, how to prep it properly, acetone, Scotch-Brite, emery cloth, different purging techniques on what you're able to get and what you have at your dispense.
Well, and keep in mind, if you have any questions or anything, you can send them in on Facebook and try and get to whatever questions we can to answer, get directly to these guys. So if you have any problems or you've been having any issues trying to do this or working with this, maybe you can get answer to your problem, which, these guys would obviously be the ones to talk to. So, well, let's.
Well, we can explain some more stuff before we get started.
However you want to go about it. Yeah, you were saying before you had notes.
Yeah, I just wanted to try to cover everything properly. When you're bonding or joining two dissimilar metals like stainless steel or mild steel or different grades of stainless steel, you don't want to use a 308 rod because it doesn't have the properties for corrosion.
Yeah.
So as it heats up and cools, it'll rust.
Right.
So 309L is what is used for dissimilar metals or mild steel to stainless steel.
That's rod.
Yeah. And then a lot of times amperage is associated with heat in a part. So the amount of amperage you have, people think if you turn it down, it could possibly cool off your weld.
Right.
As far as how much heat is going into
Your
the part.
penetration wouldn't be what you're looking for.
Well, the whole part.
Right.
So it's not necessarily the amperage, it's how long you're lingering.
Right.
So if you set it too high and you're getting the metal too hot by not moving fast enough, so it's a rate of speed. Every time you dip, it's going to cool the weld slightly. So that's what I was getting at as far as people think they can just turn their machine down.
Right.
But in reality, it's how fast they're moving.
Right.
And with stainless steel, you don't want the heat to build up in the part because it brings out the impurities
right.
and it could possibly rust in one aspect. But then
is there like a schematic or a gauging? Like, can you buy something that gives you, the size of the metal compared to what your welder should be set at, your rod size?
That was another thing I was going to touch on is the different metals, the percentages of what you set your welder at, and a good rule of thumb is 1 amp per thousandth of an inch.
Got you.
So if it's mild steel and it's 120 thousandths, like DOM tubing, I tend to run it a little high because you can always dial it back with your foot pedal, and you can initiate the arc faster and get the heat there quicker and start moving than if you don't have enough amperage. You're going to put a lot of heat into that part to get it to start joining, and then balling the rod up because it's too much heat in that area before you even get it into the weld.
Right. I mean, that's a nice part about this. I mean, you have, knowing it and being good at it, you guys have the ability to play with that pedal. You know what I mean? Get your heat, your speed.
You still want to get it set close because that's one variable you want to rule out. You don't want to have to worry about how hard or how much you're letting off.
Right.
And a lot of times the heat starts to build up in the part, so you're going to taper off a little bit with your foot pedal anyway because it'll flow easier as you're welding the part.
Right, but you're looking to maintain a certain heat because that gives you actually your penetration, your tracking and penetration.
For example, when you're making as the weld progresses and you say 4, 5, 6 inches, you're building heat that entire time. So your amperage you can adjust that in your foot pedal by coming off to make up for all that heat that's built up along the process of how much time it took to make the weld. So but
and go ahead. Go ahead. I'm gonna move on.
With the constants he has, I think it's important to know that you can complicate anything as much as you want to, and a lot of people in TIG welding are just getting into it and are curious about it. I'm learning, and
well, you're doing a real good job, by the way, for learning.
It's if you follow these constants and the important factors, with sanitary and all the processes and do the education and listen to things, like Austin, you can do it with not the big fancy expensive welders and equipment. This is stuff, if you adhere to the simple rules and pick this stuff up,
and that's it too. It's a procedure, right?
It is.
I mean,
and some of it's a lot of, everybody's different. I'd say you can get 3 amazing welders, accomplished welders side by side, and they all do it a little different.
Everybody has their own technique.
And especially with TIG welding, and it's what makes it tough is there's so many facets going on. Your foot, your hands, both hands, and,
Yeah.
and hand speed is a
Yeah.
big variable in all this
Coordination
happening.
factor is super high here.
Yeah.
But it's
Where-
not like, I mean, I'm not saying anybody can do it, but this is something practice makes perfect
Yeah.
kind of thing in the more. And you're saying you just started, Brian won Golden Bolt in LA here and his bikes here. And for just starting and still learning, well, not just starting, but still learning, I mean, his bike's amazing. So, even.
Well, I've been in welding, 20 years.
Yeah.
And primarily stainless steel.
But like
so
you
it's-
said, you're still learning, and it seems like this is one of those things that it's something that you master, but you never master.
For
You're
sure.
always looking for better.
Yeah.
Perfection's definitely, the end game here.
there seems to always be some variable that I can never get the
Right.
perfect
Yeah,
weld.
Right.
because you're only human, so you're only going to
Yeah.
be as perfect as you can be, and the best thing you can do is follow the prepping steps so
Yeah,
that
those
you can
procedures,
rule out
those steps. Yeah.
anything that is easy.
Yeah, and it sounds easy, and like you were saying before about that hand-eye coordination, foot coordination. It's like, oh yeah, I can do that. Well, it's not that easy. That practice is what makes it,
It's-
smoother.
Split second movements and judgments and knowing where to watch, because a lot of guys, when you start to get to second nature of where your torch is, how far your tungsten's off,
Yeah.
which is a big thing for heat.
Well, that'll change your
The
heat
size,
pattern
yeah.
also,
The
which
heat-
is another thing you're looking for, a consistent heat pattern.
The ripple and the heat affected zone, you don't want to put too much. Motorcycles vibrate a lot, so they'll shear metal if
Right.
the heat is too high,
Too high.
just outside the weld, because the weld's the hardest part.
Right.
And making those adjustments as you're moving, it's ever changing. Angles, tungsten angle,
Yeah.
different factors as you weld. So also, once you get it figured out, being able to make all those changes,
Yeah.
in the process.
And
adjust
keep
to
it
your
consistent.
adjustment.
It's a challenge. That's
Yeah.
what makes it fun.
Yeah,
It
and,
seems like every weld could possibly get messed up.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's it too. It almost seems like and I said master, and you could never master this because it takes one piece of dirt, like if the wind's blowing the wrong way, it's pushing your argon the other way. I mean,
Yeah.
so many factors can be an issue here, and you kid around about working on these bikes and doing all this. Cleanliness is dirty as working in a shop like this. Cleanliness is super important in all reality. So,
Well-
make sure your tools are clean, make sure everything's,
Yeah, like having an aluminum
Right.
and a stainless
Stainless
steel one mark.
steel.
That way you're not
Yeah,
cross-contaminating.
you always want to work with the same, and I know people that go all the way down to the wheels that they clean their tungsten
Doesn't
with
have-
only. Yeah, that's it. That's all.
I've ran fabrication shops that the stainless area is all to itself, temperature controlled. I mean, everything. It gets that important.
Yeah.
So it's often overlooked, but a very important reason. And sometimes if you get it all figured out and you can't figure why it's not welding right, usually if you go back to the beginning, it has something to do
Yeah.
with the stuff that Austin's covering now,
Impurity or-
the basic,
yeah.
simple stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, it seems like there's so many different variations, and watching a lot of people that have welded for years, like we were saying, somebody can teach you how to weld, but nobody can teach you your technique. So I think
it's like a signature.
yeah, exactly. I think once you get the basis, then your job is to invest time and
Yes.
and practice
Hood
makes
time,
perfect.
yeah, and knowing. I mean, research videos are great because
Yeah.
you get
Yeah.
they have a lot of good ones out there now.
Yeah,
like,
but again, that hands-on, sitting down with the machine, learning the three.
And as a whole, outside of motorcycles, it's a dying trade. I mean, if
Yeah.
this is something you can master and you can weld stainless pipe, you're going to go and get a job for $25-30 an hour right now.
yeah.
I mean, it's
Forever.
and
too.
and it's not just a geographical thing. I can tell you. So it's this is a really, there's a lot sitting on this table more than just our love for motorcycles and,
Yeah.
and building stuff. There's
Brian and I were talking earlier about his frame is all stainless and front end and on, but if you don't know stainless, it will move a lot as it cools and the welds will shrink, and you have to tack it properly before you weld it out because it'll pull one way or the other as the weld cools. You have to weld on opposing sides
Yeah.
for even pull.
secure your piece, secure your frame rails, because whatever you're working. secure
And
it so
and
it
other
can't
techniques
move.
like what pipe fitters do, they'll take whatever, usually it's a lot thicker, but
anything and they
eighth
put it in the
inch.
center of the table so they can see it with the camera.
okay. So they'll take a piece of TIG rod, whatever gap they want, and like say for this would pull a lot if you were just to set it on and tack one side. Well, what happens is it shrinks and this will pull this way. Well, now you can't get it to pull back flat because it's against the tubing right here. So if you just take a simple spacer, whatever, like I said, whatever rod you're using filler-wise, and just kind of space the part off, and then when you get your initial tack on one side, you have the space to bend it back and then get your tack on the opposing side and then work.
You know, and that's sort of the nice part about this, you know, like before we were coming up, Chris had mentioned to make sure to ask questions to, you know, because they can get answered. It's stuff like this that, you know, when you're in the rush, I know we've done it many times, you don't think about that. So to have somebody else come up and give you those, it's those little tiny techniques that, you know, thank God you guys are, you know, willing to share this with people. You know, I think that's possibly what makes a bit of a difference with Greasing Gears and other shows. Just something that silly can save somebody material. Like, this material's not cheap.
And
you
time
come to
making
stainless,
that initial part.
yeah, right.
And all this type of stuff, and there's tons of it in fabrication, was all figured out by somebody going through a lot of grief of cutting stuff apart and all. You know, and we, I think, all as builders share stuff, and we face a problem. It's like, oh man, you know, what do you do here? What have you done? You know, and that's so it's.
Yeah, a lot of
tricks
phone
of the
calls.
trade are a big part of it, and that
a
just
lot
comes
of
from
phone
doing
calls
it.
between builders, and like we've actually had issues a couple of years ago here. What, this is our third year? Is it our third year here?
Fourth year.
Fourth, and Brian actually was having a problem, and you know, like saying, to be able to pick up the phone and call numerous other people that are walking around here or in the industry. Yeah, I mean, even in that range, in all reality, one of your smartest tools is your phone. To be able to call somebody and say, hey man, I need a hand, you know, this is what's happening.
Well, I think what's cool is Brian and Ari, we're not really professional bike builders per se, but we build professional show level bikes, I guess. But we incorporate what we learn on a daily basis into building motorcycles, which is outside the realm of what you would learn in a motorcycle shop. So we have a vast knowledge of certain things that a person may not learn.
Right. And then there's the other end, like, you know, saying, bringing this out to the people is, you know, like you're saying, you're not a professional bike builder. You have a career. You have something. Both of you have a whole other direction of, you know, what you do. So, you know, the caliper of the motorcycles that are brought to the table in this room, if you could see the bikes in this room, it's off the charts. Some of the most amazing machines are right here in this room with us right now. I said Brian winning Golden Bullet. I mean, that is.
I didn't end up getting.
Yeah, I mean that's a huge accomplishment. And you know, last year with us in Texas, second place in Texas, which was big. So for this your second bike you've ever built, and you won Golden Bullet. I mean, that's gotta have a little bit of weight on it. What's next, Brian?
You know, I'd never been out of the country before, and it goes to show what welding can do for you. You know, I'd never been out of the country before last year or so, and my last build, which was my first full build, also a stainless steel chassis and front end. It took us to Switzerland and Abu Dhabi and all over the world, that just from something I built in my garage. So,
and this one here is giving you ability. I mean, if it comes together for the little double win, this takes you to the world. AMD, is that what it is?
Just to be, you know, amongst this, have the opportunity to represent the USA is pretty cool. So that's a huge honor in itself. So it's
no pressure. You know, I mean, it's no big deal.
Hey guys, real quick, I want to go back to something Austin was saying a minute ago. You were talking about how it's important when welding stainless that stainless moves a lot, and going back and forth to opposite sides to control that heat. Talk about why that's especially important. I mean, in all fabrication, coming up with a process for the welding is important, but explain why a little bit, and explain how that's even more important with stainless because of that, its nature to move.
Well, I think a lot of times it's good to have stuff fixtured up and held down and properly tacked numerous times.
And let it cool.
Let it cool,
like,
and then that way
don't unhook
you
it.
run between tacks,
right?
And you don't have to worry about it shrinking because the backside already has 3 tacks on it, so it's not going to be able to pull as much. It'll still shrink, but it's just better to distribute the heat on stainless as opposed to mild steel, I guess.
Yeah, stainless is more sensitive to movement for sure, more problematic, and like in welding a frame, you know, the heat, kind of what I said before, how you have to adjust your amperage at the tail end of a weld because you've created that heat. Well, that same principle applies to that metal moving, and the heat's what makes that happen. So, just for example, you know, the top tube's 1.25 inches round. So, I've even, at times, once I tack, which is usually in quadrants or even more, then I'll kind of connect parts of those across from each other. It's kind of when you lock down like the wheel on your trailer or your truck, you know, you kind of cross around. It's the same principle, and you're distributing that heat, which seemingly may not sound like a big deal, especially on such a small circumference, but it really does make all the difference.
Yeah, when it comes to that shrinking factor, that's huge.
And every piece is connected to another piece. So that's where it becomes really complicated of, you know, and fixtures are important in understanding what the metal is going to do and how it's going to pull based on where you're applying the heat and the heat buildup in the process. And it all ties together because, again, you know, what you were explaining earlier is hand speed and amperage is a huge factor, you know. So it all ties together, and that's what makes
in your application, you went with raw stainless. There's no covering on yours also. You know, so talk about the pressures on. Not only do you keep it so it doesn't bend, but your welds have to look beautiful.
Aesthetically,
I mean, there's start and stop. There's another thing to talk about.
Yeah.
That start and stop factor, like we're saying, looking at your welds and looking at Austin Welds and some other people out there. What's your procedure for your stops and starts to that keeping that heat the same all the time, keeping your movement the same?
So it takes a lot of practice on, like we were talking about how the part gets hotter, so it's going to take less amperage from when you started halfway around the part to get that size ripple. So it's always good to start slightly ahead of the last dab, get it starting to melt, back up into the weld, and watch how big the circle of the focus of the arc is, and then you can start running. It just takes time of looking behind your torch, because another thing on your foot, your hands, your speed,
eyesight,
it's what you're looking at
you're
and
breathing.
Focusing on. Because a lot of times you're looking how high your tungsten is or where your rod's at. So once everything becomes second nature, I don't even worry about where my hands are anymore, really. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's like for people who aren't as experienced that as you guys are, that starting point, you need to find those comfortable spots, you know, to...
And being comfortable is a big thing.
Yeah, that's it. And comfortable environment, comfortable, the breathing. I remember Will Ramsey saying, you know, breathe, don't hold your breath. Keep
it's hard.
Breathing.
You'll hear me if I start welding, I'll be like,
it's like he always said, breathe, it's going to relax you, it's going to make you more comfortable.
If you could see the faces everybody makes while they're under the hoods, while they're trying.
I can hold my breath for a while, so I can get a pretty good bead going.
So, another Will thing that we just threw right out the door.
One more thing before we move on, touching on, say, coped fittings, coped pipe that butt up to each other. Fitment is huge, not only in a butt weld on exhaust. You could fusion weld this, but if you have a gap, it'll just melt away. But for movement on a piece, as far as the weld pulling, if you have a bigger gap on one side and you start to fill it with rod, that weld is going to shrink a lot more because there's no parent metal there. So it'll pull even harder because there's nothing for it to stop.
And the big difference, like a lot of people, you have two different thicknesses of metal. Is it easier to weld thicker than thin, or and all is it all? It
is in the beginning if you're welding like mild steel or aluminum, because there's a lot of play there. You can pour a lot of heat to it and learn. But the thin stuff, the pulse plays into it as far as keeping the heat out of the part. That allows the part to solidify between each dab. So you're putting the right amount of heat into that one dab. It's allowing it to solidify for a second as you move. And so instead of keeping a steady amperage, you'll see on your heat effective zone, it'll taper up and get wider.
Right.
So it helps to keep it consistent that way too.
Well, now we got a couple tricks, couple different demonstrations of how that do things, set some stuff up.
Yeah, and if you're fitting exhaust, it's always good to mark your cuts as far as when you want to butt them together. So I'll either put A, and I know these two cuts were from the same.
Yeah, you
on the
set
bandsaw.
yourself.
And then I'll put a scribe line down it so that I can pivot it to it and line it up perfect, and then it.
Yeah, and you also want to do that if you're building something specific. That way you don't accidentally weld the wrong pieces together. That way, it's like mocking up your setup.
And after, like with stainless, I don't know, Brian's the same way. I'm sure you are super anal about preparation because after bending and coping a piece for an hour, you don't want to fuck it
accidentally
up by
weld the wrong side.
Well, or not prep the inside. Forget to prep the inside, and you prepped all the outside.
Again, your prep is same steps as welding, just like the majority of everything you do. You have to take steps like.
And don't get ahead of yourself, because
Right.
that's the thing with TIG.
Don't rush.
It's about patience and learning and not getting discouraged, and it's not easy. So you don't want to rush. Because you'll just fight it. If you're not prepping your parts, it'll never weld how it's supposed to weld because you're not taking the time.
Yeah.
But people get anxious and don't want to just sit there and scotch-brite pieces.
Yeah, which again, your finished product's only as good as your steps to that finished product.
And we'll kind of walk through from start to finish how you should kind of prep things and what you have to your access and
Is
what
that
works.
where your lovely assistant's going to
He's going to hold stuff for me. No. So there's different ways you could use wire brushes, stainless steel wire brushes, on a drill bit, like for tubing, similar to this, but round. And you can run it inside and out right on the edge of the weld, just maybe an inch in. That way you know you're not going to pull anything into the weld. Like I said, Scotch-Brite's great for stainless as far as prepping an area. And then you want to acetone because there'll be whatever you Scotch-Brited, oxidation or whatever that's on it, oils, glue, adhesive, acetone will pull any of that off. A lot of times you don't want to leave Sharpie marks on stainless because as soon as it starts to heat up, you can't wipe it off with acetone. It
burns into
it's weird, yeah.
It presses
it stays
the metal,
in there. So another thing is make sure your tungsten's sharp, make sure your tungsten is clean, make sure you take the time to clean your rod also because when they come from the factory, they're drawn out of a larger piece, so they use oil in that process. So even though this just came out of the package, you'll be able to see.
Yeah, you'll still get dirt off of it.
Yeah, and that little bit of oil could be the determining factor on messing right up at the end. So this was just pulled out of my, I have like airtight cylinders that I keep all my rod in so it doesn't get moisture and all that. But that's
obviously.
just from...
Yeah, you can see. So definitely, like I said, is rugged, is hard as steel. This is all such a delicate process that, you almost can't be too careful.
No. So, and you want to do it more than one side, but see how dirty that is, and it's brand new.
Yeah, so, and like we were saying before, the material's expensive. I'm sure the time you're putting into what you're building, time isn't, your time isn't cheap. You can't put that to the side. So to rush through and take a chance of ruining something you're building overnight.
And the time of fitting it up and standing back and looking at it and putting almost $500 just in 8 bends that you're going to be using for your exhaust, you don't want to have to run back to the store.
And to something as silly as, like you're saying, one small step might change the whole, the whole process.
And then once you acetone it, don't grab it with your bare hands. Like make sure you have a nice set of clean gloves set aside that you don't grind metal with, you don't handle mild steel, rusty mild steel, because then that's being put right on the outside of the rod. And you can see right here, that's just from a rubber band.
Yep.
So that would get introduced into the weld. But I'll tack this up and show how it pulls once it cools.
Cool.
And with stainless, with mild steel, like we were talking about, 1 amp per thousandths. Aluminum is anywhere from 20 to 30% more, would you say?
I just kind of wing it.
That's what I do too.
And you can overcomplicate anything. You do anything for so long, you just kind of get a feel for what's what and where your amperage is set. And I'm like Austin. I kind of put it on the high side where I can adjust on the low end with my foot. So it gives you gives you a little forgiveness, if you will.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Sometimes they say stainless, you should weld at 10 to 15% less because it doesn't take as much heat. You don't want to introduce that heat into the part for corrosion.
Yeah, and if you do longer welds, again, that heat buildup, it causes the problem to be able to come off come able to cut off the pedal and have that
Move that to your pocket.
that range
Oh yeah, and
is
so
almost a necessity.
what he's saying as far as range, if you set your machine at 200 amps and it's a 200 amp machine, the ratio of
So it broke.
you pushing your pedal full throttle will be 200 amps. But now it only pivots so far back. So from that angle, that range, you have 200 amps to play with.
Stick it in your front pocket.
If the part only needs 120 amps and you set it at 130 amps, you can almost full throttle it initially, get it welding, and then taper back off and run your weld the rest of the way. So a lot of times you don't want to get crazy with what you're setting your machine. You just want it enough to get the part melting quick enough to start moving.
Yeah. And that's what I was saying before about the heat. I mean, I know people that say that they'll go with a bit of a lower heat and just mash the pedal all the time. And that's not a good process.
No, because it
So-
takes longer in that spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, Austin and I had the conversation outside about that if there's one thing, problematic with getting your heat right in TIG welding is common train of thought is if it's too hot or I'm burning through it, is turn the amperage down. But again, it doesn't always work that way because now you're staying in one spot to generate enough heat to try to melt it.
Show them
And it's
the
actually the
difference
metal
between the
itself
white
that is
dog.
getting hotter. So
Look at that. You can see the difference between where he just hit it with the Scotch Brite.
Right
so
here.
And then he's going to clean it. You can see how clean it looks now. Then he's going to hit it and clean it up even more. So again, you can't stress, especially like the stainless and the aluminum, that cleanliness factor is like, it's nuts. I mean, we do it all the time, and it still makes me laugh how you're doing something in such a dirty environment.
So we'll take the acetone and also take off the Sharpie marks. But just simple prep inside, outside. Aluminum is bad. If you're welding flat plate, you want to prep the backside of your weld because it'll pull it
It'll
from the
draw it
backside.
through.
And that sucks.
Yeah.
And what you were talking about, thinner stuff to thicker stuff, TIG is the machine for welding thicker stuff to thinner stuff.
Yeah.
Stainless mild steel, so you could weld the 60,000ths to 1/8 inch and focus more heat into the thicker
side.
part.
Right.
But
Hey guys,
still-
I got a question in from Facebook here. Carlos Amador. He says I use 90% alcohol to clean my welding area. How do you guys feel about using acetone or alcohol?
Well-
what's your preference?
I don't know anything about alcohol. I just know that you don't want something that's going to leave a residue on the part when this evaporates, so
Yeah.
it won't leave any type of.
Right.
It could be noxious gas when it heats up.
Right.
So if you use brake cleaner, it could
Oh yeah,
kill you.
definitely cause a problem for you. You won't have to worry about your weld, that's for sure.
Yeah. So just kind of follow simple guidelines that people.
Thanks,
have done.
Carlos. We always know Carlos is watching. That's one nice thing. He never did give us an update on that game last night, though, so we never heard the final. But he was in there letting us know that it was going on. But yeah, again, Facebook, don't be afraid to, this is the time maybe to get some questions answered that you've been having issues with, or even if you're getting ready to do a project, this might be a good platform for you to make a decision whether you want to go with stainless or you want to go with steel. See the difference between the two.
Also, you want to prep your work area. Anything that the parts are laying on could introduce
Yeah.
bad things. But we're not going to purge anything. We're not necessarily set up for it, but we're just going to show you a couple ways that you can achieve purging from these rubber plugs that
the fancy way.
they expand when you put them in the tubing. So, is that good?
Yep.
So this is your inlet from your either second tank with the regulator or your splitter with the regulator. And this is where we were talking about.
This would be your splitter. So.
Right here. So 7 to 10 pounds, 15, whatever. I like to keep it lower because I would hate to blow my weld out right at the end. because it creates pressure, and the molten metal is soft, so it's gonna push out. But as you snug this, and a lot of times you don't want to weld right by these because you'll mess them up, but that creates a seal that's not going to bring any oxygen in.
And you can buy those in different sizes, or
right, and it's more of like a plumber's.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that's a test plug for plumbing, or I know for a while there freeze plugs. You could buy aftermarket freeze plugs. I've seen people drill those out and use them.
And this is a real inexpensive way to cap ends, or if you have a bunch of sections of exhaust pipe, you're going to want to pre-tape with something that's not going to leave residue. Painter's tape?
The blue.
Oh, there it is. Oh, they used it. Huh. Yeah, go ahead, help yourself.
Those bastards. There's no respect in this world, Austin.
Here, my props. There you go. So, go ahead and hold that up.
Hand model. He's our hand model.
So you could tape the end. Like I said, this is sticky enough it's not going to come off, but it's not going to leave a lot of adhesive on a polished part that you need to prep again, or a brush.
Because again, like you said, the stainless will leave marks. And if it's going to be a finished, if you're looking for a finished product here, a raw product, you definitely want to
You're
plan
still
ahead
going to
on
have
that.
to acetone it.
Yeah.
But this is an easy way to peel off. And like we were talking about at the end, that's the cap part, you just want to poke a little bit bigger than this actually.
Hey, this is a good question. Probably Brian could field this one. Jake Ladd says, can you talk a little bit about how you guys approach purging a stainless frame? Does each joint have a hole drilled to allow gas to flow through?
I do not purge weld a frame. I know people that do. I know Will Ramsey has purge welded a stainless frame and welded out every joint where they connect. That's one of those things probably is up for debate of necessity, but mine are not. Critical welds and stress points, I do a double pass, a root pass, and then a cap pass. I've drilled into my frame for mounts and things where I see the back side of the weld and know that I have proper penetration. And from my experience and understanding stainless, for what I'm building, I think it's sufficient from a structural standpoint.
So if you do your root weld and then your second weld over it, do you have to worry about as much of the heat shrinking on that secondary weld as you would on the root, or could you just
not
go over it with a
typically?
nice clean pass?
Once that first weld is complete, your root pass, if you will, that's pretty much where you're going to stay.
Yeah.
I still follow the path of directional welding and crossing because it can't hurt.
Yeah.
But if you take all the procedures, even going back to the most basic things, in sanitary side of it, when I do my frames, after I bend them, cope them, everything's ready. They're fully polished, wiped down with acetone, and then welded.
Right.
So it's quite a process, and through that I cover all my bases. So to answer that, I don't purge weld them, and I don't think it's necessary, but hats off to who does, because it's a lot of work.
Oh, it's a lot of extra.
Prep,
work. Yeah, prep work.
And certainly can't hurt. It's you can't knock anybody for taking extra
Right.
steps. That
Safety first, Brian.
sure.
So back to the easy stuff. Capping can also be used, just simple aluminum foil. And it's coming off your regulator. You could just have a piece of hose, wrap a couple pieces of aluminum around it, crushes real nice, smoosh it in there, and then a piece of tape around it. And then what I was saying about multiple seams,
Yeah.
you're going to lose a lot of your argon or introduce oxygen into the seams,
Right.
even if they're just tack. So you'll lightly tape the seams. It's tough because some people tape them, peel them back slightly, weld it, but then the adhesive starts to
Yeah,
fit.
you got the adhesive there then.
Yeah.
And to purge welding, when I get back to do the frames or not to do the frames, or I always purge weld exhaust and use rod. And a lot of that comes down to the thickness, the wall thickness of your material too. You know, when you get into 16 gauge, which is typically exhaust, the heat's a totally different animal than it is if you have, you know, a 156 top tube or something like that. You know, it's where purge welding is usually seen in the thinner wall stuff.
All right. So we'll set up our little spacer.
Oh, look at that. You're even getting to see it in action.
Yeah, and then hopefully it doesn't make a fool out of me, but it should pull.
Well, you know what that means. Now it's going to happen.
It doesn't take much.
Yeah,
Let me take my hat off and get ready. Can you hold that for me?
He's taking your hat off,
sir.
you, Brian.
What's that?
Yeah, let's make sure that we do not look at the weld. We can, I mean, I'm not that big, but I'll try and stand in front of it.
And then I was talking to Brian about a couple little techniques I do. Sometimes you'll kick your machine on, everything will be set, tank will be on, and you'll strike your first arc, and it'll act all erratic and start blowing sparks everywhere. And you didn't allow your hose to get purging to the point of
Right.
the weld. It was still back at the regulator. So I always hit the pedal a couple times before I start welding
always
and make
make
sure
sure-
everything's
Just make sure you're in good shape with all your product, you know.
And-
And a lot of times, would you do a test weld before you weld, or when you're ready, you just jump in?
I just jump in because
Yeah.
I don't want to waste time, but
It depends on what you're doing. You know, if it's a real visible weld, it's something that's, you know, a big part they mentioned earlier in TIG welding is being comfortable. So if it's a long one or a tough one to get to, I'll kind of do like a dry pass, if you will. You know, just kind of get in position, make sure I can make the
that's
make
always
the
good.
pass. I'm comfortable, because being uncomfortable and trying to weld something just makes it all that much harder. So. Yeah, and sometimes if I haven't been on the machine or it's a new machine or switched it back from something totally different, I'll just do a quick little pass just to make sure everything's dialed in right.
Yeah.
dry runs are great because it's how you get the torch angle is pretty serious on penetration.
Right.
And there's a lot of things we can get into, angles of grind on the tungsten,
Right.
size of tungsten.
We want to hear them all.
Hey,
we have nothing but time.
We have Steve Wilson asking that. What kind of tungsten do you recommend using on stainless and why?
I use E3 just because and Will Ramsey will probably tear me up on it, but
Oh, that will.
I
His
like,
name's come up a lot already here today.
I'm just a little shop, so sorry, Will.
It's gonna be a drinking game. Every time Will's name comes up, we gotta do a shot.
No, listen, we're sending Will an invoice for $20
Right.
every time you guys say his name.
Will Ramsey, faith forgotten.
He's done all the education,
Yeah,
so
he's
that's who you
scientist.
refer to.
You know, right now his head's so big he can't even get out of his shop. Just
He's
to let you
cool.
know.
It was
He's
big
watching,
anyway,
hey, Will.
naturally.
Yes, it was.
He's a brother.
What were we talking about, Will, though? Oh, what was the
Tungsten.
question? Sorry.
Tungsten. What size tungsten and why?
With the, I got off a little bit. With the E3, you can weld numerous different metals, so I don't have to switch back and forth and spend money on tungstens that I can use that
More compatible
work well.
for multiple
Yeah.
applications. Otherwise,
Yeah.
then
Aluminum, stainless, and mild
yeah,
steel.
right. I mean, would you say if you're doing mostly stainless, you go to just a stainless one, or again, you're comfortable with what you use? That's
Yeah.
So find what you're most
You?
comfortable with and run with.
Tungsten wise, yeah, I've always used the 2% thoriated. Has always been just what was thrown my way, and I stuck with. I think it's a good
And
versatile.
what color is that? Is it red?
I think it's the red one, or maybe
And then there's orange.
I got a whole
There's
drawer full.
lanthanated-
But I think
lanthanated,
it's
there's thoriated.
the red ones. And but I think at the end of the day, whatever there's you have choices in tungsten of what you can use for your application. But most importantly, is the quality of it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of junk tungsten out there that again, another variable that'll make a difference.
Oh,
So
keep-
spend the extra money and get.
I was going to say, keep in mind, when it comes to tools, as much as you hate to admit it, if you buy a cheap tool, you're
Yeah.
going to
What you
get,
pay for.
buy a
Save
good
yourself the
tool,
trouble.
spend the money, buy the right tool the first time. If not only, when it comes to something down to wrenches, not only if you buy a cheap wrench, you're using that thing, they will snap apart and they come out like a bullet, like it's not a game.
Yeah.
So go out of the way, buy the good tool, you end up way happier in the long run.
Right.
So,
Yep.
All right, well, I'm wondering if I should even put my third hand on here to try to make it.
Just to back you guys up too from YouTube, Juiz Varlin said E3 is very good, used most of the time.
Right.
So I don't know if they like using E3 as a all around.
Yeah, and like Will, I think he gets his from like Germany.
there goes
and
another shot.
yeah,
He said, Will.
he's like a scientist, so I'll save that for him.
Oh,
I
he
just
mo- he
act
most
like I know what I'm
definitely
doing.
Yeah.
He knows
Just
what he's
refer
doing.
to Will. Yeah.
So either with stainless, it's one of the metals that you can actually fusion weld, and it's a pretty substantial weld because of the properties in it. But it all depends on what it's for.
Yeah, right.
Exhaust, yeah, with good purge and with good penetration, it won't crack. But structural welds, you definitely need. You
Yeah.
can get fusion tacks to start,
Right.
which is kind of nice because they are sunken in, and you won't notice them as much as you run over them. It won't be a humped bead if you're
Right.
trying to dab the same amount. Or if you do get heavy tacks, you can use that material as you're coming around and kind of not dip and
Draw it.
draw it into it.
Draw it around.
And you can foot pulse. You can, to try to keep, once you see and you're trying to keep the heat out of the part, you can get used to pivoting your foot.
Yeah.
And it all comes with what machine it is and what you're used to using.
Austin was showing me we were talking about the pulse option on pretty much all the newer machines have now, and I've personally never ever used the pulse option on a machine, but I do it, I do a manual
Right.
pulse, and again, that's just the
And
way I've always done
seems
it.
almost internally you'd be better off with a pulse than having to chase the pulse that it offers you.
Yeah,
Well-
you can adjust, and it almost helps get that rhythm of everything,
Yeah.
of all that stuff going.
And here's another machine question on the welder-wise. Like, I mean, there's the Lincolns, the Eastwoods, the Millers. What's your preference? What
Miller. Yeah.
do you not like? I mean,
No.
just
But once you start on one, it's hard to change because they're totally different.
yeah. Me and Chris go through that because he has a Lincoln set up, and at the shop I have all Miller stuff, and he's like, "Oh, I wished I had mine." And he's like, actually gaining on that Miller. He's getting way better with it. And then I always wonder when we pull the Miller or the Lincoln back out if it's going to affect them, which he'll blame it on that anyway.
Well, a good tip on buying a welder is don't settle for
Yeah.
a welder just because it's how much money you have. Maybe save a little longer.
Again,
and,
yeah,
you
get
can
the
grow into that
tool.
machine instead of getting to a certain point where you can't get any better. You outgrow your machine,
Right.
so it doesn't help you either way.
Yep, yeah.
I'm a Miller guy too, but I went to the Lincoln plant and I had the opportunity to go. We did a project on the automated side with them and toured the whole place up in Ohio, and it's pretty amazing in their technology. And so, I mean, it's Ford and Chevy, you know.
you're right.
There is some I'll say cheaper brands out there that technology's really come along that if
Yeah.
let's face it, if you are stuck in a budget, then it is what it is. You have to look at your options. So, and it's getting to where there are some. So, but, my short answer would always be Miller.
Yeah.
Hey, one thing I'll add to this conversation, and I'm not going to be brand specific about this, but there's some of the bigger brands like Lincoln and Miller. You can actually now start to get those in box stores, smaller versions,
like
smaller
Lowe's,
welders,
yeah.
but they are not
The
the
grade.
same welder.
Yeah.
Like if you're used to using a Lincoln welder and you're going to go to Lowe's and you're going to buy the Lincoln that you see at
disappointed,
Lowe's, I guarantee it's not the same welder, man.
Yeah,
You're
go
right
dir-
off the bat.
Yeah, go directly to a
How
Lincoln
much do
dealer
we have?
or
Are we good?
You got
We
plenty of
haven't-
time,
We haven't
yeah.
welded anything yet.
And I'll tell you, at
Good.
the plant, you can see that it's not the same welder. There's the production line, like almost that's at the stores, and then
It's a
they
shame
have
that-
their high-end machines that, I mean, for a
yeah, it's
you
a
know-
shame to actually do that to the public. Like,
Yeah.
they should let them know right up front that it's not the
Have to
version.
do your research.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah.
But, like we were saying before, a lot of people, when you're getting ready, and, I'm guilty. I know Chris is guilty of it. When it comes to buying a tool, and you have something come up, you're going to use it, you're pretty excited about getting that tool. And sometimes you jump the gun a bit, and you don't research it quite as far.
Right.
But a big purchase like welders and stuff like that, you need to do. You need to do your homework and make sure you're happy.
Hello? What you're going to be using it for. So if
Right.
it has AC in the settings, if you're going to be welding a lot of aluminum or...
And Miller's really good about, being able to get in touch with them, question answered, problem solving, troubleshooting. I've always had good luck with issues with them. And, if you call them or get with a rep of what you're wanting to do and what you're wanting to weld or get into, they can, there's such an array now, and it's so diverse that make sure you get the right machine for what you're wanting to do.
Yeah.
And back to, like I was talking about Sharpie lines on these, lining
Right.
stuff up for cuts. There's always a weld seam. This has one right there. The exhaust pipe, because of the way that it's
Right.
wrapped, there'll always be a weld seam. So if you need to line it back up, you can reference that on the inside. Another tip that I was going to tell you. So welding stainless, some guys will start their argon before they even strike an arc because it's there when they strike
Right.
the arc. So you'll hit the pedal, bring it
Set
into where you're going
yourself
to weld, and then go. Post flow, you don't have to get crazy with post flow. 8, 10 seconds, depending how hot the weld is. You just don't want your tungsten to be orange when the argon turns off, because
Right.
then you're gonna introduce oxygen into the hot.
Compromise your tungsten. Yeah.
And then it's little variables that you may not know that that's the problem, and it
Yeah.
can screw you up.
Again, cleanliness. You can't specify enough how many times preparation. Cleanliness is huge, especially obviously between stainless and aluminum.
Right.
Seems way more than
Right.
regular steel.
And another tip I do is as I'll get to the end of a weld, your tungsten is bright orange. So if you don't want to touch it right into the hot weld because it'll stick.
Yeah.
It's still soft. But if you touch it just slightly off to one side, you'll notice that the tungsten will change color like almost instantly.
Instantly, yeah.
So instead of lingering and possibly the argon shutting off before it does cool completely,
Yeah.
just touching it to the side of the metal allows it to cool a lot faster. It's just little stuff I do.
Right. Well, let's do some welding. Again, don't have a screen.
Look
so
right here.
Yeah. Evan, stare at this blue light. Looks like he's already stared at a few blue lights.
So back to comfort. You don't want to be up off your wrists. You want to be stationary. Sometimes you want to be able to move, slide, so you don't want to put a lot of weight on your hands. Keep blocks and different types of angles to elevate to where you need to be at, so you're not uncomfortable or out of position.
You ready? As I try and block the audience. While he's welding again, thank, I don't know, I keep cutting out. Thanking Progressive for the grease and gear stuff. All the people here from the Cherokee. It's a pretty awesome place. The riding down here is just amazing. Everybody was a little concerned.
And this segment specifically brought to you by Lincoln Electric.
Even though we like Miller. Maybe I shouldn't have these on. I'm going to put a little more heat in just to dramatize it. And as the weld cools, the part will pool to where it didn't do it as bad as I hoped. Making a liar out of me.
And again, you're hanging there to cool the tungsten down
And the weld.
to purge that weld up.
So that'll help cool the weld to a point that it's not molten anymore.
Right.
And able to bring in oxygen. So I don't know if you can see that. Can you see this? So it's minor, but the amount of gap here compared to this touching, just from the pool of one tack.
Right.
So a lot of times when you put that gap in there, you can come back through and it gives you the clearance to kind of get it tapped down straight, and then you just go the opposite side. And a lot of times a good technique to do also is to snip off your where it cooled, because that is going to introduce possible porosity into the weld, like initially right off the bat.
Right.
So you'll just be dragging, you'll be dragging it around in the weld.
These guys use fancy terms a lot of the times, and I like to come back and I have a certain amount of Hillbonics that I use in my everyday language. So I just say, this keeps junk from jumping in your weld.
Well, he said quadrants, which means quarter point. So like a pie.
Quads
Yeah.
4.
Oh,
Yeah, at least
those
4.
big words. I like pie though.
I like pie too.
Oh, that was almost like Pat Jansen was here again. I like pie. I'm missing Pat right now. I'm usually.
I do have an inside joke for you guys from Kurt Green, who's watching. He says, both of these guys are good at what they do, but y'all put the bald guy next to the motorcycle hippie. Bald lives matter, he says. I don't know what that means.
I'm okay with that. It's my stunt double. Right? Mini me?
Not identical.
Just, yeah.
Close enough.
Have you ever seen Spaceballs?
Yes.
The stunt doubles they capture? And you want to strike the arc.
Now look, Mark just told everybody don't look at the weld. Look at them. They're staring right at it and laughing too. Later on, they're gonna be like, "Man, my eyes are really bothering me."
I can't see.
Tomorrow we'll have the class on flash burn, how to treat burnt eyeballs.
It's sand in my eyes. So we'll tack all 4 corners, and then with tubing, it's easy to get out of position. So it's good to quarter point it. That way, you're only running maybe an inch, depending on the size of the diameter of the pipe. But as you have to establish the same torch angle the whole weld. So a lot of times guys will start running up and they won't pivot their wrists, so the tungsten aims away from the material or above it, and the arc gets real big, and then you start balling the rod and it starts falling onto the material. So you have to get used to, some guys will twist the hose up a couple times and load it, and then just lightly hold on to it, and as they come around they can kind of throttle. This will spin in your hand. That,
Have to write that down.
That's
a
one
good trick.
technique.
Dude, I just got
It
something
does
from
help.
that too.
Now
That's awesome. I'm trying that.
Now he's stealing all
I've
your
never
good
tried that
ideas.
before.
Oh shit. Yeah.
Or you can just hire somebody to spin the piece of metal for you. That way you don't ever have
Yeah,
to
but
move.
then it's
That would
timing.
be great. Well,
Or you get a positioner,
yeah.
and then you do it that way. But so you'll quarter point it, and then maybe I'll run a weld standard, and I'll run a weld with pulse. And with pulse, to get a proper weld, you're going to increase the amperage quite a bit, because it's going to explain pulse. It goes to a full amperage of what you're set at, and then this machine, it has a default setting, so it's not like, hey Kevin, you can't really fine tune it. Speaking of grades of machines, there's different options. So a default setting of 50% over the course of half of the time it's on, 50 and 50. So if you're at 100 amps, it'll drop down to 50, and then if you have it set at 1 second, you have that. So up,
Jumps
down,
back,
up, down.
yeah.
So you want to set it, say if it's a 120 wall DOM, a lot of structural welds, you don't want to use pulse for penetration. But if you have the heat setting right to get the metal hot enough, you'll get a really nice weld.
Hey, Evan Favaro is in the audience actually making comments on this show because he's such a smartass. Does Mark know the welding UV rays can't travel through the TV to burn the audience's eyes?
Yeah, well, but it's
No,
the cost of the camera, unless by chance you have 10 of them in your truck.
Yeah, we made the mistake of burning the iris of a $3,500 PTZ camera one time, and now we're super careful.
So we've come to the conclusion my mom raised ugly kids, not dumb ones. So where are you standing that?
Pat never had a heckler, Mark. I'm just saying.
What's that?
Pat never had hecklers.
Yeah, I know, but I don't want to tell you what
respected.
him and Pat do together. He's the only guy that heckles, but he'll be up here and he'll need my help, so. Pat needs what? Oh, yes, he heckles himself.
Yeah, he brings it on himself.
Yes, he does.
So stainless, we were talking about, it heats up really hot compared to, well, aluminum does also, but to the touch, so you can use different tools to allow your hand to be held on that metal long enough to continue and finish a weld without dying in pain.
Yeah, right. Without, or
you've
getting
done that
third-degree
before.
burns.
Yeah, these things are a lifesaver.
Yeah. It's called a TIG finger. What's Jody from Welding Tips and Tricks?
Yeah, there's a few places you can
Plug.
get them now. They're more popular, but it's from what I understand, it's basically like firefighting hose.
Yeah.
Or welding blanket.
Yeah, or
material.
welding blanket they do them with. Either one, but they're amazing for the. You'd be surprised what gloves don't hold up to the heat
Right.
when you're doing this, and
Right.
those do. So
And another tip is hanging, just letting the hose hang. It puts a lot of pressure on your fingers and wrists to hold it at a certain angle. So if you coil the hose around your arm once,
Yeah.
it will take all that hanging weight off of your wrist, and you'll have a lot more
A
movement.
little more
I usually always wrap it around my neck, just to have it.
Right.
You looking at that blue light there, Evan?
No, you chased him out of the room. You had to get rough on him, and he left. You happy now?
And now he's nervous because his segment's next.
We were getting a nice little audience together here, Mark, and you had to.
Hey, it's what I do. I tried to not to give me this microphone, but now that you've opened that door.
So for tacking, I crank it up, 20 amps from where I'd be welding it, because it's just a quick initial hit. That way it leaves it slightly sunken, but you get filler in there to hold it, and when you run back over it, like I was saying earlier, it's not as noticeable. So I might even pulse my foot. It just depends how it starts to weld. But this would be purged on the inside.
Right.
So being 1/8 wall, it's 125 thousandths, so 115 amps should do it, but I still like to go higher than that because I don't want to linger.
Take the chance, yeah.
You can always back down off the pedal. And then I have a torch that I can bend
Oh yeah,
at
yeah, an
different
adjustable
angles.
head.
So it's all about,
Did that thing really just flex?
Yeah.
I'm over here flexing.
Okay, I want one of those.
That's what she said. That wasn't me.
No, listen though, when you get done there, you got to talk about that because in welding, man, like comfort and position is what it's all about. And I've seen the ones that you can actually tighten into position.
Yeah.
But man, to be able to grab on the fly and move that thing, that's the coolest tip. Yeah,
You can come up over stuff.
that's awesome.
And initiate your arc. And you want to roll your wrist as you're coming around to keep the torch angle the same. Who's talking out there? But and then the FUPA cup, it always does a real good job of shielding for the color, allows it to cool. And then I'm gonna try to pulse weld it. I've never done it on this machine, but we'll see.
We got another question. Are those welding blocks made or bought? Are those something you bought somewhere?
The V blocks?
Yeah.
You can get them JTS carries them real cheap if you just want to use them, because once you start banging them around and dropping them and using them for this instance, it's not going to be good for machining.
Machining, yeah.
But they're just machinist V blocks, and sometimes I think you can magnetize them, like
Say
a
again?
sign. You can magnetize them like a sign.
Yeah.
But it's squares two pieces of round up perfectly off the table at the same height and holds them centered. So you get your initial tack, and then so I'm gonna set the pulse roughly like 1 pulse per second. See how that works.
Carlos Amador also on Facebook asking us. He said his mom is watching and she doesn't speak very much English? And do we have a translator? Carlos, do you know how impressed that we are that we got 3 cameras working at the same time today? A translator?
You want to know what
That's your job, Carlos.
this guy said to me when I asked him to come up here with me?
What?
I speak no English.
Yeah, it's a tough crowd. Evan found that.
You're right. So you'll see the pulse every second. It gives me the full amperage that I'm after, and I can dial back a little bit. And it'll keep a good consistent ripple
Yeah.
aesthetically.
Oh, yeah.
And again, it's playing with this because there's default settings. I'm not sure if you have to have it rammed at 100% of your amperage for
Right.
it to pulse properly.
Yeah.
I think it kind of backs off, and as you let off the pedal, it doesn't pulse how
Right.
it should. So the better you can dial the machine in,
So pulsing, definitely pedal mashed.
it just depends.
Because if you
My
move the pedal
machine-
while you're pulsing,
Yeah,
you're getting
with this
double.
machine, it time tapers off.
Yeah.
With my machine, you can set the duration
Oh,
of the
the height
pulse
and the
and
drop.
say for 16 gauge stuff. If you go, this is 50%, so it'll go from 100 amps to 50 amps.
Right.
But if you put it at 30%, so it'll drop considerably. So it gives it a quick shot, like
Yeah.
a laser
Then
tack.
drops it.
And then it drops it and allows it to solidify, and then you just move
Right.
just a little bit.
Yep.
I don't think I can really show that with this machine on.
And not being able to actually, I mean, you can see through the other cameras the light, but not being able to have a camera directly on that to actually
Yeah,
watch what
right,
you're
right,
doing
right.
is also making it a little bit difficult.
And then I was taught by a guy, I was struggling with stainless because it would turn gray. And it's mainly because I was not moving fast enough. But once I saw him weld and
Yeah.
how fast you can do it, I just didn't know that it can be done that fast.
Yeah.
So unless you'll struggle unless you have somebody to actually show you the proper way. But
Yeah. Just try and copycat them, and then
Yeah.
once you get it down, then come up with your own technique.
yeah, and then notice you're always snipping the bad off, but we'll roll into the weld and try to make it to where you don't see the start and stop. So I'll start ahead of it slightly, back up, and then when you pulse, you see how big. I'm just dabbing right on the edge of the weld. And it all depends on how well it's tapered
Yeah.
or beveled, I guess, because the material is gonna fill in better.
I mean, is there an actual, taper dimension you go for?
For
or,
pipe fitters,
I'm saying
Yeah,
in general, when you guys work, is there something you shoot for, or is there something that you should do? I mean,
Anything, in fabrication blueprints will have a degree
Fillet,
of,
yeah.
of the bevel called to specs, which, will get inspected, but on stuff like this, it's not as critical. I keep saying that, I'm pretty, there's a lot of things that have a lot of forgiveness, so I try to stick to, I just eyeball it, maybe 45 degrees or, 30 degrees, somewhere where you basically have a good valley where you're wanting to bring those two metals together as one with your filler rod, and it needs that space, especially, if you do exhaust and you have 16 gauge
I need
material,
that one.
which is, 0.065, there's not much there. So if you put it together and welded it up and then you want it to make it look like one piece, you have to grind down all that weld.
yep.
Well, and if you don't have that valley created by the bevels, and you go to grind your weld off to make it look like one piece, you don't have anything there.
Right.
Especially if, you didn't purge it, you didn't add filler rod, I've seen it done where it's been fit up, they fuse weld it, and then DA it and then call it good. And I mean,
So you hit a bumper.
yeah,
start the
bumper.
motor.
That's just
Yeah.
there's nothing there. So it's, you know, that's the purpose of the bevel. Where I don't think it's super critical, like it is where they may call it out on specs on a blueprint for what you're doing. Long as you have a visually, you know, what you're trying to accomplish, you're good.
Yeah, I don't know. I know
I don't overcomplicate things too
it's
much.
good to bevel your copes too,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
if you ever notice on a cope, on the high side of it, it's super sharp and thin.
Yeah.
So you'll melt that metal away a lot easier than you will on the flat that's on the low side.
Right.
So if you put a blunt bevel on it, like a pretty abrupt bevel, the penetration will go further into the actual tubing than just melting away
And
that.
the
When you-
bevel
when
that
you
put
have-
on,
I'm sorry, when you
the
have
bevel
your-
you'll put on, you'll fill with material anyway. It's not like, you know, you're gonna notice it.
When if you make a proper cope on your tube, and you take it, clean it up a little bit, and it should be almost flow right as one piece.
Right.
Like you said, there'll be really thin material. So if you try to weld that, there's nothing there. And you try to shoot when you take down the metal and bevel it for welding, weld prep, they'll call it. You want to weld the material thickness or the better part thereof. So you want to see almost the face of that wall
Yeah.
thickness
Right.
to where you're going to lay your weld in. And then that essentially almost creates the same principle as your bevel on the pipe. You know,
Right.
you're creating that valley to fill with weld rod and create one piece.
Yeah, I mean, so you don't need a massive bevel, but what you do
No.
is to have enough of that material to fill back up. For
You can have too much. You know,
Yeah.
you can
Right.
have not enough. It's
better safe than sorry, I guess you'd look at.
Because
in that
more
situation.
rod will cool the weld faster.
Yeah,
Not-
I don't pull out gauges and
Yeah.
all that stuff. You know, I eyeball it and know.
I'm
Okay,
saying, I
that's my root pass will fill that pretty well. Or if I'm just doing one pass, you know, a 3/32 rod is adequate. That
Yeah.
should be about right. And you know, again, the more you do it, the more you
Yeah.
you get the
Get
feel for it
used
and
to-
what's going to work. You know, and everybody again is a little different. You know.
And then, like with aluminum, there's a lot of variables with aluminum that you could both find before and then have serious problems the next
Right.
day.
Master mild steel. Get into stainless before, because aluminum will only drive you nuts.
Oh my god, it's a different rhythm.
Yeah.
It's a
It's
different.
a totally different animal.
The arc comes through the ground, or the energy comes through the ground
right.
back and forth.
But once you
so-
get it, you'll love it.
yeah, it's
Because
smooth.
it's-
Yeah. But what happens with that is the filler you're adding is drawn to the tungsten instead of the energy coming.
Right.
Because it moves back and forth as the cleaning effect to clean the oxidation off the aluminum, because it'll oxidize just after a couple minutes
Right.
of sitting there. So it's real hard to penetrate. So it goes back and forth, AC/DC, and
Yep.
you'll see it push out in the shiny puddle. You do not want to dip your rod into that outer ring, but keep it in the shiny, and then you just
Yeah.
move along. And it's more like a stitch. As you move, you want to stay close to the
Yeah.
material, but when you go to dab your rod, it's almost a movement of back,
Lift, dab, lift, dab.
backing up. Yeah,
Yeah.
And when you fill, then
Right.
you move down, back down.
Yeah, it's
back up,
almost like
back up.
stitching then
Yeah.
in general, because you're actually pulling your tungsten back up away from the
Yeah.
aluminum.
It's because it'll jump on it.
Right.
It's crazy.
So what are we gonna do next? What do you got next?
I was just gonna
Do a thinner piece.
show some tacks, like for thin stainless steel and fitment, how that's detrimental to, say, getting. I like to fit. A lot of people probably do, but fit the exhaust up on the bike as you go, piece by piece. You
Yeah,
know, everything's
right.
gonna miss stuff, and it's nice to have the TIG, because you can fusion tack stuff real quickly and not.
No rod.
Yeah, just tack, and move
Yep.
around. With MIG, you add material.
Yeah.
So you have to finish that off. So you just don't. I like to keep stuff clean. Once it's prepped once and welded, it looks good, and
Right.
it's less work.
Hey, we have a question in actually from Kurt Green again. He said, "What's been the hardest thing to learn for both of you?" And that means like welding stainless, aluminum. Like, what's the hardest thing you've learned in welding so far?
I thought he was going to say, "What kind of conditioner do I use?" The hardest thing, it's all hard.
in welding in general, he's asking.
Yeah.
I had a hard time getting aluminum down right in the level of work I had to do where I was at the time. It was aluminum was troublesome. You know, stainless came pretty easy to me, whereas a lot of people have trouble with it. I think just because I was introduced to it so early and focused on it. But aluminum can be really tricky, especially if you're navigating it yourself, you know, and trying to learn.
Yeah.
And like we talked earlier, the tips and tricks and the things you learn, that's definitely important in aluminum.
Yeah.
And if you don't have those things, it just makes the process a lot harder. So, but again, once you do it, is
It's fun.
It's fun.
But it's also a bitch.
And some of the coolest projects I've done in my welding career have been with aluminum. You know, with NASA, we've done things for NASA, and it's all because of aluminum work. So it's pretty neat.
So like with these V-blocks, to get a good, complete fit up, if you slide them onto the same V-block, they'll be the same height. So you just make sure like I was saying, the weld seams, you can use that as a guide. And the only reason I'm doing that is because I just cut these real quick with the bandsaw, and you know, if it waves a little bit,
Right.
it's going to be transferred onto the other piece. So as long as I can line those two up, I should be able to get a pretty good butt on it, to where with stainless for tacking, maybe I can show a couple examples. I'll act like I'm showing examples if it doesn't go right.
Oh, look at you
Okay?
go.
So for tacking, I'll set it twice as much as what I would weld it at. So if I was going to weld that like around 50 maybe, I'll put it like 110.
I think I usually do exhaust like 55 amps. Roughly.
Okay. So if you, like I was saying, double the amperage, this is just like, they call it like a laser tack, but you'll set the tungsten in the seam, roll it back slightly out of the seam, but you kind of want it straight up and down so that the arc is going to be directed at the material, but it's just a quick 1-2 second maybe in that spot, but it's a full hammer on the pedal, and you'll see it just happens really quick. Or it'll blow out. So
There's a fine line here.
almost missed a step.
Oh, you didn't clean up, see?
I didn't clean up. See, I thought I was waiting for somebody to catch me.
Yeah, and again, even saying like, pay attention to it. Here you're sitting, imagine at the shop, a few friends sitting around,
Yeah, you
halfway
can
through the
overlook
bike,
it.
you're like, damn, I never cleaned anything. We got to take it all back apart.
All right, and then like this is called a third hand, so this helps a lot too, just to keep stuff from moving around. So let's see if I can make this happen.
Now, since this is thinner than the other stuff, do you change your rod size?
Yes, and that's what I was going to mention too. You could use 3/32, 16th. A lot of it depends on how much heat you're putting in the part, because if it's too thick, it won't. It'll just gob up and fall.
Right.
If it's too thin, it'll ball up before it even gets to the weld, because the weld arc is so hot that it'll just melt it back. The opposite. And torch angle. If you're aiming at it, it'll melt it away before you get to it. So if you're focused on your part, you can get it. I don't know the exact angles. It's just how I hold it. And then what else is I gonna say?
What's he forgetting, Brian?
I think you're good, man.
I don't think I am.
Brian's like, come on, Elvis, just weld it.
He's like, I'm hungry. I got hot dogs on the grill. So like I was saying, drop it into the seam, lift it up. I'm like a 16th. And it just takes that split. And then, so you have a nice, almost indentation that you can go back over. But you get 3 or 4 of those on something, and you don't put a lot of heat into the stainless. I've noticed even on exhaust, when you have it bolted up and tacked, if you only have 3 tacks instead of 4, it might not bolt up the same when you go to set it back on the bike. So it's good to get 4 to 6 tacks on everything, and I'm sure I can show you how it blows out too, but this is fitted up pretty good. I'll just run a couple more around it, and it's super fast. Like, you can do it with flat steel, any type of sheet metal that you're butting together on hot rods.
And the smaller that you make
Right,
it,
Evan?
the more accurate, the easier it is to weld over it. So you still here?
Yeah.
You still here?
There's just a lot of things, a lot of thought goes into everything, really. Aesthetics, mainly. I like aesthetics. I think Brian does too.
Pretty much in this room, aesthetics makes a difference.
Would you like to try this, Brian? And it's so fast, but you see one start to melt, and then it fuses to the other one almost instantly.
So you'll just do that, like you're saying, multiple times around this piece.
Yeah, and they're not strong tacks.
Right.
Like if I was off a little bit on say I'm coming out of the head or right out of the head,
pop it back
and
off.
it's 2 pieces. Yeah, I can just either hit it with a hammer or wiggle it.
Yeah.
Wiggle it the sides that don't have the tacks, and
Yeah,
it'll just
snap
pop
back
right
off.
off. Then you just have to clean. If you tear it, it'll tear.
Yeah.
So it'll take material from one side or the other. Now the other side is actually going to be sticking down. So you just got to buff that off a little bit, and then it'll butt right back up. Let me see if I can. I want to see if I can get one to blow out. Or do you want to try it?
Oh, I can get one to blow out.
Not a problem.
Usually when you don't want it to.
No, I know. So it's just a quick hammer down. And like I said, I put my torch off to the side, set my tungsten on the material, and it cools it right away. And this is a tip I learned from weldingtipsandtricks.com online. I watched hours of videos. I think I bought the whole DVD set, actually. But I just do a lot of research.
No QED for you, right? That's all. Well,
Another plug. I don't think I'll be able to get it to blow out. I'll try, though. Nope. So with proper fitment, it's almost impossible to actually blow it out, but I'll set one together that, and another thing we can go over is prepping your cut edges so there's burrs, and those will actually melt away faster and cause problems than the actual parent metal. But you want to deburring tool for the inside, and then like a flapper wheel on the grinder to buff the outside.
yeah.
I'll just line them up to where they're not even, and like see how this has tape on it and adhesive?
Yeah.
I'll show a little bit of what that does if you're lazy and don't want to actually prep everything properly.
Hey, that's a question that I have personally for you guys. A lot of guys will get so particular about surface prep that whether it's a flapper wheel or even the...
If it has aluminum oxide in it, it's not good for aluminum? Is that what? For grinding the tungsten?
Right, yeah.
Because it embeds it into the tungsten.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've read that.
I think a big thing with that is if you're using grinding pads or specific pads you like for your metal prep, make sure to keep them separate from stainless and aluminum and steel. You know, it goes for everything.
Yeah.
Cross-contamination, is a problem in shops and everything else that, stuff that shouldn't rust starts rusting. And anything that's on those pads, you think you're cleaning the metal and you're just putting all kinds of junk into it. And now that's embedded and it's been heated up and you're never getting it out.
So you were asking earlier about rod size too. I brought, this is 20 thousandths, like spaghetti. Like, what's that, angel hair?
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're fusion welding your exhaust, this adds such a minor amount of material. If you have a spot that's not fitted perfectly, you just have to dab it when you get to that point.
Just as fill.
And it could be bad enough to where you have to use a 16th router. And what you can do there is lay it in the crevice and do the same technique I just did there. And I'll show you that on the other side of this. But I'll be able to get a good tech here. When I roll it, there's a 30-second inch gap there. So I'll tack this top. And I didn't clean it or anything. So, I mean, it'll probably be all right, but just for example. So it's just a quick hit, and that's tacked, but then I've got a pretty good gap on the back,
Right.
so that's an example of pull as it's cooling. So I'll go ahead, right here, I'll try it, and you'll see it actually melts the metal away from. So now, if you're wanting to keep your welds consistent and aesthetically pleasing,
Yeah, that's out,
you
out
can't
the
do
window.
it now.
Yeah.
So either you run a bigger band of weld. I'll show you how you can fix that. If you're going to buff it down and then run a bead over it, but if you take this rod and lay it in that, it's happened to me a time or two. It's very disappointing. But you lay this rod in there, hit it with the same quick shot, and it fuses all three together then.
Yeah. So show it laying in there before, like you'd lay it down in there, the rod.
This? Oh, the rod.
Yeah.
So that,
Because we're like doing all this and the camera's not getting
Sorry.
a catch. You know what I mean? So
I'm
to see
so
how you're
sorry.
laying in there. It's
Yeah,
okay.
don't yell
Brian
at me.
said he'll do it right after you're done. So
I'll get you right.
yeah, like they can't, like showing you how they're doing it, you'll see the end product, but like laying it in there, like, I mean, I'm sure I've seen people try and stick it in there straight down before.
right, yeah, you
Yeah.
want to lay it kind of flat.
Yeah, across.
And then, because this will melt away pretty fast.
Right.
Sorry.
And like you said again, trying to get comfortable has got to be,
Key.
definitely a factor here.
And sometimes you'll even have to push it in a little, but for the most part, you should be able to lay it. Just hit it. And it'll kind of repair the two. And if you're just like tacking them and you want to fix that spot, you can buff that down and then Scotch-Brite the whole part. And then
Yeah.
use that material there, because this would be kind of hard to weld with that gap. It's going to want to do that every time you go to
Right.
depth. So if you start on that tack, you already have material there to
Add to.
start moving.
Yeah. So you draw it.
Right. Let me see. Do you want to weld at all?
I think you just woke him up.
Just sitting there looking good. So then another good thing like this, like I said, this third hand, handy.
As he talks to himself in his helmet.
You can't see me when I have it down.
So Chris, did I miss anybody I'm supposed to thank or any of the?
I'd like to tell you stuff that's going on social media, but Evan's been having a half-hour conversation with his mother, I think.
Well, I'd like to thank her then.
Yeah, so here's
Thank
a
Evan's
good
mother. There you
example.
go.
Chasing keyholing because it's too much of a gap. But when you pulse your foot, you can kind of get caught back up to it and just make sure you get the rod in there. It does put a lot more heat into it,
Yeah.
trying to fill the gap. It's possible. But see what it's doing now with the adhesive
Right.
that's on there. So fitment is key, cleanliness is key, the steps you do it, and learning, like researching and
Yeah, lots of watching and paying attention to what other people do. Like I said, I mean that's most of what we do. That's pretty much where I learned.
yeah.
I mean, me and him me and Chris had went to a class years ago. Where was that? Leroy Thompson's, remember? With Big Brian.
He's
and
from
sat
Ohio,
down.
right?
Yeah, and
Defend Ohio.
This is a good
Where was
model.
it?
That was his big thing, Defend Ohio. Hey, real quick, Ryan Coldwater from YouTube says you could weave it at lower parameters to combat that gap. What do you
Correct.
say?
Yeah.
Well, aesthetically, that's what we were talking.
It's tough to leave it low because you need the amperage there quick. So
Yeah.
the more you wait, the more it's just gonna melt away.
Well, you got any tricks, Brian? Anything specific that you do in a situation like that, or?
In terms of having a gap
Yeah.
like that.
Try not to.
Yeah, you try not to. I mean, if take the time up front for fit up, because a good weld is 90% in the fit up. I mean, it really is. So if you know,
Might be hot.
if you have a good fit up here, there's nowhere for that metal to go. I mean, it's pretty much going to stay in place as good as possible. There'll be shrinkage, but it'll be minimal. Now, if you have a gap, you know, something where he showed where it's, you know, that metal is going to do everything it can to close. Even if you can't physically do it, when you apply heat to it, that's going to happen. So a good way to see how difficult it can be a lot of times as you walk around and look at the bikes is when you have exhausts that are maybe meant to be parallel, but they're kind of like this.
Yeah.
Or one's kind of like this, and they don't, well, if
Gaps.
that's gaps and fit up, and two, it's just a very hard thing to accomplish. So there's a lot of movement in the pipe. So if you can get away with where, you know, if I need that gap to get it on the plane it's supposed to be, tacking is probably the biggest way I eliminate as much movement as I can. You know, if it needs that gap, I'll even stitch weld the bottom. I'll use a trick like one of the, you know, a piece of
Lay
rod
wire.
or whatever it is, that gap, and then I'll tack and close in on each side of it where there's almost, it's locked in that place. Let it cool, and then I'll follow my same weld procedure, but in a way that I want it to pull a certain way. So if I'm going to weld here, I know I'm going to, you know, it's going to manipulate it that way, let it cool. So it comes back to the things of learning metal and what it does, but the order of operation's important. But first and foremost, do everything in the world you can to be avoid the situation in your fit up. You know, and that comes back to everybody says, well, I'm a welder or a welder, I want to be a welder, but being a fabricator is the most important part of that, you know, because your fit up is everything. Unless you fall into one of those things where you have a fitter that fits everything for you and you just sit there and weld it, and then, but
Yeah, I mean,
But,
in most anything, your prep person's as important as your finish guy.
it is, you know, and you can avoid literally sometimes days of trouble in trying to fix something if you just would have taken a half a day up front to throw that piece out, do it over again. No, it's got to be right, you know. I mean, I know it's only a 1/16 of an inch, but
Yeah,
that's going to come back to haunt you big
it makes
time.
a big difference.
Yeah.
And just like in anything, I mean, whether it be wood or metal or plastic, I know in construction, your drywall guy's only as good as the framer, the finisher's only as good as the hanger. You know, just like in this setup, if you have somebody come and roach your metal together, it's make it look nice. So,
Yeah, and I have a lot of stainless experience, and I'd be lying if I said I haven't done an exhaust and laid it out, welded it, and just say, what the hell happened? You know, like that, and it goes in the, use it for something else bin, you know, or the scrap bin. It's,
Yep.
Not the
you know,
scrap bin.
I don't, I mean, at least I haven't met the person. I haven't met anybody that gets it right every time right off the bat.
You have now
So-
today.
That's why I'm sitting next to you. But it you know, it's just a difficult thing in metals and
well, in that
stainless.
situation, it's most everybody's wife. that- you know.
Right.
But a
I
lot
don't
of it's
have one,
trial
so
and
I'm
error.
good.
You know, there is, no matter how long you've been doing it or who you are, there's a little bit of trial and error. And
Yeah.
whether it be welding, metal shaping. I mean, ask Evan. He's, you know, probably about the best metal shaper anywhere in this region right now. So
He's probably the best metal shaper on a couch in this room right now.
Right. Yeah, most definitely. He
in
is
a
definitely
red shirt,
Yeah.
drink it away. But no, you know, there's variables that you don't see or control, or you learn. And it back to you're always learning.
Yeah.
You know, it does something that, okay, now I know not to do that, or you know, so that's part of it.
Question.
But it's all in fit up.
Good. What I was going to say too about fusion welding exhaust pipe, when you're purging it, as Brian mentioned, it helps cool the inside. It also holds it out, so fusion welding is a lot easier if
Yeah.
you actually have it purged.
And would you purge something like this, Brian? You would purge?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
16 gauge wall exhaust.
Almost there.
I always purge it, and two, I always use at least some amount of rod, even if it's this
Yeah.
the really small rod.
Yeah.
I think structurally it makes a big difference as opposed to just relying on drawing those two metals together,
right.
to fuse themselves. Literally,
You will get a lot of, it's kind of like undercut, because
Yeah.
you're not adding material, you're taking it away from the two. But if you have really good fitment and you have a quick pulse,
Right.
you can fusion that spot with very low
Right.
suck from either side.
So what's next? Where we go to from here?
I was going to try to foot pulse this
Oh, boy.
fusion.
yeah, that's the way I've always done it.
Well, there you go.
can
You have a
make-
sucker to
make
do
a
it
run
for you.
at
then.
it and
You
show
can
you
do the other side.
however you
See
want to
this-
do it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Brian Butera.
We have a winner. But I'll try to, maybe a couple different techniques, but I'll try the real quick hit and then off. See how it works.
You don't get that light, Evan?
And another thing these are good for is you can hook your ground to it, and if you weld silicon bronze on the end, you won't get arc marks.
Charlie Brown's teacher's our welder.
That's pretty bad. Arc marks suck. Or if you take a piece of like ground cable and braid it a little bit, you can wrap it around and ground to that, and it's a good ground around the whole thing. With minor damage to the finish, so you just would have to re-scotch braid it
Right.
or whatever.
Having a good weld and everything coming out look good, and then finding an arc spot
Yeah,
down
on the
the
wall.
is horrible.
Like a black. So for fusing, sorry.
There you go.
For fusion, you want to be really tight to the material, so you're
Direct heat.
very focused.
Yeah.
The arc is very small, because the bigger the band, the further away you are, the more you're going to heat and melt away.
Right.
You want your amperage at,
Okay, fix his mic.
you good at 110?
The Austin's.
Yeah.
Let me see your. Look at the mic. There's the end of it. Right there.
In other words, you're killing me, Smalls.
Hello. Hello.
Give that a shot.
Since you're not busy right now, was that me? That's my mic doing that. Jeez.
Real
I'm
nice,
yelling it in.
Chris. And you're
So
yelling at
since you're
Austin.
not busy,
Little hot.
2 questions in from Ryan Caldwelder. First was, what's your method for welding around miter joints, and what kind of cups and what size? I wanted to bring up the cup thing because you use a specialized cup to begin with. I'll give you an opportunity to talk about that.
Yeah, I like the FUPA cup. It's a number 12. It might be a waste. A lot of people might think of it as a waste, but it definitely shields what you need it to and leaves a really good looking weld. Plus, he gave me a couple of those, so I'll definitely use them.
They're I've bought them. I've bought the glass ones, and they're super nice. They're super expensive, and it seems like that it's a given that every time I get one in the mail, it drops on the floor within the first 2 weeks. So I've always used the standard, the pink
Gas lens.
gas lens that probably the most old school thing there is, and to this day I think that's what I welded that frame with.
Yeah,
So
it works.
They work, and the glass lens is nice for visibility, and the coverage is good, but I think you can set up your rig with traditional cups and accomplish the same thing.
Yeah.
And
So-
save you some money along the way.
There's your fusion, but you notice
That's pretty.
it's sunken in a little.
Yep.
So you could, like he was saying, take this. This is really thin, maybe the 30,000. And you kind of just lay it in there. You don't want to add the material because it'll hump up.
Yeah.
You want to actually get the penetration to go down in when you're doing butt welds, because like he was saying, it's going to be on the surface. So the more focalized heat you can get, and the way that the tungsten is sharpened will determine the penetration you're going to get also.
Yeah,
So
the tighter you're pointing the tungsten, the more direct
the more direct it is. I don't know, is the broader, wider penetration and the tighter further in, but less?
I've always assumed that the longer the taper, the more
Direct.
pinpoint it is. And as you come out with a bigger degree and have wider tungsten to a quicker, sharper point.
Larger fillets.
Yeah.
So
I always kind of go the route you have it there, a more long tapered.
that's how I like
And
it.
again, I don't get real precision about it. I just,
Just what you normally do.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
And they say it could melt away and fall in, contaminating the weld also.
Right.
That'd be a pretty high amperage, because it wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
But if you're 150, 170,
If you were using a thicker, bigger piece of metal, you wouldn't need that direct. You'd be able to shorten that.
right, but you could go larger tungsten,
Right.
and then it won't melt away from the heat.
Yeah.
And then when you get into aluminum, tungsten prep is a whole nother
Yeah.
animal in
Ball
itself.
in.
It's-
Right.
So,
Some don't ball it. Some allow it to ball on itself. Some turn the machine on DC positive, and you can put it on a piece of steel straight up, lift it slightly, hammer the pedal, and it'll ball it.
Right.
And you turn it back to AC, and you have a perfect
That's
shiny
what you
ball
want
on
to
it.
use. Yeah.
There's a bunch of different techniques, but I'll lay this in there, run the same style fusion weld. It shouldn't be as sunken in.
Right.
And I always cut these shorter because they're very flexible, and it's hard to pinpoint where the seam is with the rod.
So
You
that-
could even use bigger rod.
Yeah.
Your turn.
go at it.
Is it
See
your
if I
turn?
remember how.
Where you want it at?
That's fine. We'll make it work. And we're gonna just fuse one.
I love just fusion welding because you can almost hold the torch with two hands. And hold it right there.
Yeah, you take out one variable of you got to worry about with the feeding rod and
Yeah. And you can
Angle
use your hand.
goes
No,
ahead.
oh, you don't have one?
no.
So
I
Ryan,
haven't figured.
Ryan Colwelder against us, 308 stainless filter, ? And Will Ramsey in the house, everyone.
Oh boy.
Oh, God.
Have you ever used purge pressure to float fusion weld on thin walled tubing?
What's that on here?
Will has said, have you ever used purge pressure to float fusion weld on thin wall tubing?
Yeah, that's what we were talking about as far as it helps hold it out from sinking, but we're not
So I want to
purging.
know, did somebody call Will and tell him we kept talking about him to get on there? I'm questioning, is he stalking us?
Oh, lefty. Southpaw. Let's see how quick he's rotating his foot. So that's full amp, half amp, full amp as he moves. And it's always good to use a couple practice pieces if you've got a full exhaust tack together. You can get your
That
timing,
looks all right. You know.
your timing, your movement, all that down.
So what did you just? That's no filler, no nothing.
Yeah, that's
your foot pulsing.
no filler rod, and I pulsed it a little bit, but it was on the higher end, so it's more or less hammered down. If it was properly purged weld, you'd have that pressure behind it, and it would make for. I don't know if you can see.
Yeah.
you have quite an indention there. And that's where
So-
the rod, comes in and you fill that in.
The purge would hold that out. You wouldn't have
A
that.
little bit, you would
Yeah.
still see some.
Yeah.
You could eliminate it in different ways, but yeah, you still may see a little bit. I could come off with the heat. I'll do one with trying to back off a little bit.
And that's the thing too. It's feeling out the machine, the response of the foot pedal, how quick it develops the arc and gets the metal melting. They're all different.
And I'm one of those that I strike and I get my gas going before I get to the area. Even on something as simple as this, I'll kind of do like we said, a dry pass to know that I can, on that one I did there, I really didn't move my wrist or my hand much or the torch, and I just rotated the piece itself, so it helped keep that constant angle and where I needed to be. And being that I don't have to worry about filling a rod with just fuse welding, it comes, like you said, you have another hand to be able to do
And
Yeah,
that.
so
which
he-
is nice in a situation like this, but in, like applications, you can't move that pipe, so you still need to.
Yeah, and you gotta, I did a lot of field work, and you learn to maneuver yourself and
Like
and
on
move
tripods
things.
and-
But those dry passes really do make a big difference, and knowing you can make it and where your angle is going to be. I'm gonna try his trick of. I usually do the.
Here, try this.
There we go. That's my
Alright,
go-to,
You do it that way.
and I usually have a narrow one.
I'm used to bigger.
Fancy.
But so now he's using his right hand like a positioner. He's rotating it with the speed he needs it to
Right.
be. Watching.
Yeah, I'm kind of creating. You can buy the positioners. And they're pretty expensive, but they're a great tool. So it's. Whereas if you throw a little rod in it, I lose the ability to move the part. So I got to rely on wrist.
And a lot of people will dip the rod at different angles. This is not really a specific way you have to do it. You could almost, say if you're welding something flat, like a slug weld or a rosette, you can dab on the back side of the arc, and it works.
So that brings it a little more flat, and there's a little issue on this weld that, I'll show and then how to correct it as well. It's pretty common if you stop the weld too fast, you'll get what they call a little fish eye. It's a little hole in the weld, and that you don't want. You can even see it in tacking where he had that tack there. If you pull off too fast, it creates just a little pinhole. So you can kind of wash it out with a little heat, or if you need to, kind of the principle he said, if you had a blowout, you can throw in a little rod to touch it. Once you do that and feather it in, you can make it look like it really never happened. But if you see that, it needs to be corrected, and this is the quick, easy way to do it.
So what he's saying is you need to taper off, kind of be patient when you get to the end of your run.
You get a puddle back where the hole is gone, and then just ease off.
To smooth it out.
There you go.
So yeah, so it eliminates the hole, and you won't have an exhaust leak or a fuel leak or whatever else. Yeah.
Or a crack point.
Yeah, or a crack that starts. It doesn't take much to create a problem where your exhaust is in two pieces or whatever else it's for.
You want to hit some aluminum?
All right.
I got some polished stuff. We shouldn't have
time?
to clean much.
You have any rod?
Yeah, his rod behind on the table back there.
I'll just, should I put it on auto cleaning, or do you want to try to,
And what?
for the balance and cleaning effect?
How does it have?
Well, I'd like it clean because it's clean stuff anyway. But the cleaning will add a larger frost.
Let's go.
Middle.
Let's see how this works. Again, I've never. It's
I
new,
know.
but I think that's a good medium point. Aluminum rod.
So swap this out.
And obviously making these changes to go from, stainless, adjustments, going higher on the heat, definitely changing from DC to AC.
Yeah, and one thing when you go to grab your rod, stainless and aluminum rod look real similar.
Yeah.
Little
So one's a little lighter than the other, but I think we've all grabbed the wrong one. And
Speak for yourself.
if you don't have it, you'll learn real quick as soon as you arc it up.
So a way to do that is this has a lot more spring when you move it. Stainless steel.
You learn so much
firmer.
at these things.
Austin said he'll write that down for you.
I think it's pretty safe to say that if you grab the wrong rod one time, that teaches you all you need to know.
I'd have to agree with you. I'll prep this in.
Austin's prepping your tip. Yeah, right.
It's about to fall off. I was knocking the point off because for aluminum, it'll ball up naturally once
Right.
the heat's generated. Did you peel it?
Yeah.
Okay.
He didn't want that.
Okay,
You'll
Will is
have to
back
probably
on
pull
for a
it back
second
out
here.
through.
What's that?
Will Ramsey is back on. I may have missed this if it was already discussed. If so, please ignore me. But do you guys prefer passive or auto dark hoods?
Auto dark's just what I've always used.
I used a flip down, old fashioned, no auto darkening hood for up till about probably 3 years ago. And I had it forever and I liked it. I had a little trouble getting used to the auto darkening, but it's definitely a nice feature. For sure.
To get in position and actually see where you're going.
Yeah.
Here.
I was just gonna.
Oh, get a ball.
Test shot.
You can tell by the sound there's literally no similarity between stainless and aluminum when you weld them. What machine? Put me up to like 200.
That's what I figured. So
You obviously turn up way higher for aluminum, and aluminum draws a lot more. I blew everything in my shop trying to weld aluminum. Everything electrical just knows it.
Obviously, you can hear a big difference not only in the welder itself, but everything around us.
it'll shut TVs off. It'll shut.
Yeah.
Too clean? Too much cleaning?
Yeah, maybe back it off a little bit. Usually,
can-
whenever you have a part and you want to you'll get 2 tack spots or get it tacked up where it needs to be, whether it's vertical or flat. Kind of get it in place. You can do again heat. So it's going to draw this piece as we weld across the top. It's going to want to fold up. So to help without putting it down and clamping it and doing all kinds of,
No TV?
you can, you can back bend it, back bow it, do all kinds of things. I'll throw a couple tacks offset on the bottom. before I weld out the top.
And when he's talking about the cleaning effect, it's a frosty zone around the weld. It just looks like a frosty white zone.
So even tacking that, you can see just 2 little welds how much that,
Pulls.
you know, when it comes to close tolerance work or building motorcycles or whatever, that's a real big problem.
I don't hog all that. I want a little bit of it.
Do what?
I said, don't be hogging all that aluminum.
So I'll do a tack in the middle and run a half pass, and then we'll kind of show the difference between what a stainless weld and aluminum weld looks like and why.
And we can probably turn the shielding down on this a little because
Yeah,
it's
and
got a
it
cleaning
again,
effect.
it comes back to, especially with aluminum, adjusting your machine, tweaking it in, but more or less, that's what an aluminum weld will look like. It's wider, it's a little bit, it's bigger,
Lot more material.
Yeah, a lot more materials drawn in, and that goes for everything, contaminants and everything else. Not that it's okay, but especially with mild steel or things like that, that heat will kind of want to blow things out.
Right.
Where here with aluminum, it's drawing that extra material in, and it's also drawing in all the extra contaminants. So it's a lot more finicky. Things like we said earlier, like getting some exotic metals like titanium and things like that, they're far more vulnerable to the things in the environment and atmosphere than welding steel or even stainless sometimes.
Right.
So, but
Yeah, what
it.
he said.
You're speechless.
And you know, with aluminum, and he kind of touched on it of how your movement is, where when you're running with stainless and you're filling as you go, I almost go back over, almost like a lattice type to catch my previous weld. Not only because how the aluminum rod flows, but if you've ever chased a hole in aluminum and trying to fill things or trying to find a leak or anything, that's just one extra way to throw a little more material on top of itself to avoid, potentially not getting full penetration or a good fill in what you're trying to weld, especially if it's old pieces, you're trying to fix cases or you're trying to fix something that has had contaminants in it and oil in it and stuff like that, and you're trying to clean them up and make them look good. When it comes time and you've prepped it best you can, that's a procedure, weld-wise to one extra way to fix it.
And a good technique for the cleaning effect, you kind of ramp up to your amperage and watch the cleaning effect grow, and it'll swirl. And then once the frosty zone is big enough, you can actually
Start moving.
dab your rod. So, like he's left-handed, so he's running the bead straight on. I'm right-handed. I like to run sideways. So just like we were talking about earlier, it's technique. No right or wrong way, really.
Aluminum burns a lot hotter. The flame, you'll cook your arms before you know it, so even more so than the other stuff. So just a little precautionary thing, if you do go to take a stab with aluminum, cover yourself up because it'll get you.
And it does take a lot of rod, so a lot of bump up your size of rod.
Keep looking. Keep leaning in there and looking up at it.
Last weld, I swear.
It goes to show that when you weld aluminum, it draws a lot.
Yeah.
And it's high frequency start.
Yeah.
Well, do you wanna not give this a shot? Let's go. Let's run with it. He's hit. Oh, real nice.
That works.
Let's find that flat spot on there again. Make sure that's facing you,
Got it.
just like that. Give that a shot. Okay, again, watch your eyes. Don't look directly at the light. Yeah, you can just hear it sucking the electricity out of the room. And it's nice because you're seeing two different people's techniques, two different people's finished product.
Well,
So-
and then with aluminum, you want to kind of swirl it, or you'll get the same thing as with the stainless.
Yeah. I mean,
A fisheye. You'll swirl the weld and dab maybe 1 or 2 dabs at the end as you taper off slowly.
right. But I mean, in all reality, consistent. You know,
I think
Brian's
this one's
are
better, probably.
Brian's are a little tighter than yours.
Oh, whatever, motherfucker.
Brian just didn't flop his roll of nickels out quite as far as you did. You know.
I like to flop it out. What can I say?
Hey, watch it. It's a family show, Austin. So,
No comment.
well, so we've touched on stainless. We've touched on
Yep.
everything from rods to tungsten, aluminum. Anything else you want to get out there,
No, I think I covered everything that I wanted to.
Brian?
I was just here for backup. I think we
Oh,
covered.
I thought you were
I
the
was
hand
nervous.
model. His lovely assistant.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I guess we're gonna wrap this one up. Oh, hold on. Yeah, let's get some information about Austin, where people can follow what you're doing.
My Instagram is Austin Martin Originals. My Facebook is Austin Martin Originals, and Austin Andrella is my personal. That's where you can find me.
So
I
where you can be
guess.
stocked.
Yeah.
Brian, what about you?
Butera's Metalworks. My name's Brian Butera. Instagram, WERX. I'm on Facebook. It's not as business oriented, but people have been contacting me there. Brian Butera. And yeah, that's about it.
Well, again, you like to, thank this Cherokee Run for bringing Grease and Gears back here. Progressive Grease and Gears, Progressive Insurance goes out of their way to help us do a lot of stuff and bring all information to you guys. People calling in, Will Ramsey, of course, Carlos Amador, who never did send the scores to the game last night. We're going to take a short break here, and thanks to Austin and Brian, I'm Mark for Grease and Gears, and we'll be back shortly.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.